The great crystal halls of the Galactic Council stretched high into artificial clouds, their walls singing with the voices of 847 different species. Ambassador walked through these halls every day, her simple human form almost invisible among the towering crystals and the flowing gas forms of the collective. Had served as humanity's voice for 12 years now. Most days, she felt more like furniture than a diplomat. The older species treated humans like children who had wandered into an adult conversation. They were polite enough, but their attention always drifted to more important matters. The Trade Federation reports excellent profits this quarter, announced Speaker, his ethereal form shimmering blue and gold. The peace dividend continues to benefit all member species. Shifted in her seat at the human table. Around her, delegates from ancient civilizations nodded their approval. The Commonwealth representatives clicked their claws in appreciation. The crystalline hummed in harmonious agreement. 50,000 years of peace. That was the Council's greatest achievement. No wars, no conflicts, no threats to disturb the perfect order they had built. The older species had learned to value stability above all else. But knew something they did not. Ambassador, Speaker said without much interest, does Earth have anything to contribute to today's discussions? Stood up, actually, yes. I wanted to discuss our monitoring stations in the outer rim sectors. A few delegates turned to look at her. Most continued their private conversations. The rim sectors. The delegate's translator made his confusion sound like static. Why would anyone care about empty space? Because it's not as empty as we think, said. My people have been maintaining early warning systems out there for decades. We've noticed some strange readings lately. The delegate's crystal form flashed a dismissive yellow. Humans and their warnings, always seeing threats where none exist. Had heard this before. Humans were known for being jumpy, aggressive, paranoid. The older species found it amusing how humans saw danger everywhere. It was just another sign of their primitive nature. What they did not know was that humans had volunteered for all the jobs nobody else wanted. Dead zone monitoring, deep space patrol, maintenance of the sensor networks that watched empty regions of space, border security in areas where nothing important ever happened. The Council archives showed the truth, but few species bothered to read old maintenance reports. Humans had quietly taken over responsibility for watching the galaxy's edges, while everyone else focused on trade and politics. Tried again. The energy readings we're seeing suggest something unusual approaching from outside our galaxy. Outside our galaxy, the collective's voice sounded like wind through caves. Impossible. Nothing exists outside our galaxy that could threaten us. With respect, said, how would you know? When was the last time any of your species sent a probe beyond the rim? Silence fell over the hall for a moment. Then Speaker made a sound that might have been laughter. Ambassador, your species' tendency toward paranoid thinking is well documented. Perhaps you should consider psychological evaluation for your monitoring teams. Felt her jaw clench. She had expected this reaction, but it still hurt. Humans had been fighting threats the Council did not even know existed for 70 years. Reality storms from collapsed dimensions. Rogue artificial intelligences that fed on quantum uncertainty. Psychic plagues that spread through space itself. But humans were young. Humans were primitive, so obviously they must be imagining things. The readings are real, said quietly. My people have died getting this information. Died, the delegate leaned forward. From what? Ships that went to investigate just vanished. We found wreckage from one probe. The metal had been twisted into impossible shapes. The crew's final message was just screaming. The hall grew quiet again, but could see the doubt in their alien expressions. To them, this sounded like another human ghost story. We recommend increased monitoring of the outer sectors, continued. Enhanced sensor networks, maybe some joint investigation missions. That would be expensive, the delegate said. For what? Chasing human nightmares. Looked around the hall. These species had built an amazing civilization. They had ended war, hunger, and suffering for trillions of beings. They had created art and science beyond human imagination. But they had also forgotten how to fight. The Budget Committee will review your request, Speaker said with finality. Next item on the agenda. Sat down as the council moved on to discuss shipping regulations. Around her, the greatest minds in the galaxy debated trade routes and cultural exchange programs. They talked about art festivals and scientific conferences. None of them asked about the human ships that had gone missing. None of them wondered why Earth's colonies in the rim sectors had stopped sending regular reports. None of them noticed that human vessels were quietly moving equipment and personnel to strategic positions throughout Council space. Pulled up her personal communicator and sent a coded message to Admiral back on Earth. They're not listening. Continue with Protocol Watchdog. Protocol Watchdog was humanity's backup plan. If the Council would not act on their warnings, humans would continue their lonely vigil. They would keep maintaining the sensors, patrolling the borders, and watching for threats that older species had forgotten could exist. Looked around the Crystal Hall one more time. She loved this place and these people, despite their blindness. They had taught her to see beauty in mathematics. They had shared ancient stories that made her weep. They had shown her music made of pure thought. But they had all forgotten that beauty needed protection. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, stayed in her seat. She thought about the reports from the rim, ships disappearing, colonies going silent, strange readings that made her monitoring teams afraid to sleep at night. Something was coming for the galaxy, something that made reality itself sick just by existing. And when it arrived, the Council would finally learn what humanity had been protecting them from all along. Just hoped it would not be too late. Captain Sarah stared at the readings on her screen and felt cold fear creep up her spine. The monitoring station Outwatch 7 hung in empty space, 300 light-years beyond the galaxy's edge. For 15 years, Sarah had watched this particular slice of nothing. Stars were born and died in distant galaxies. Space dust drifted between worlds. Mostly, nothing happened. Today was different. Run the scan again, Martinez, she told her sensor operator. Already ran it 6 times, Captain. Same results. Martinez's voice shook slightly. The quantum foam out there, it's not acting right. Sarah looked at the data again. Space itself was becoming unstable in a region roughly the size of a solar system. Reality seemed to be unwinding, like fabric being pulled apart thread by thread. The readings made no sense according to known physics. Captain, called communications officer from across the small bridge. I'm getting reports from Outwatch stations 4 through 9. They're all seeing the same thing. Sarah felt her stomach drop. If multiple stations were detecting this anomaly, it was huge, and it was spreading. Send everything to Earth Command, she ordered. Priority Alpha. 3 days later received Admiral's report in her council office. She read it twice, then poured herself a drink with shaking hands. The pictures attached to the report showed stars simply blinking out of existence. Not exploding, not collapsing, just stopping. Called an emergency council session. The evidence is clear, said to the assembled delegates. Something is approaching our galaxy from outside. Our deep space monitors show reality itself breaking down in its path. Speaker's ethereal form flickered with annoyance. Ambassador, we discussed this last week. Your species' sensors are clearly malfunctioning. 6 different stations, all independently operated, all showing the same readings, replied. That's not a malfunction. The delegate's crystal body pulsed a dismissive orange. Perhaps your equipment needs calibration. The idea of reality unwinding is scientifically impossible. Pulled up a holographic display showing the quantum readings. The assembled delegates looked at the data with polite disinterest. To them, human science was primitive and unreliable. "We need to send a proper investigation fleet," insisted. "Joint forces from multiple species." "That would require significant resources," the delegate replied through his translator. "Resources better spent on proven needs." Wanted to scream. Instead, she tried a different approach. "Then let us investigate alone. Grant Earth permission to establish a defensive perimeter in the outer rim sectors." Defensive perimeter. The delegates' reptilian features showed confusion. Against what? Empty space. The debate continued for hours. Every suggestion made was politely dismissed. The older species could not conceive of a threat they had not already solved. Their 50,000 years of peace had made them confident that all real dangers were behind them. Meanwhile, the reports from the rim grew worse. Captain Sarah sent her final transmission from Outwatch 7 on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. Her words were calm, but could hear the fear beneath them. "Admiral, we've lost contact with Outwatch 4. The quantum distortions are moving faster now. We're detecting gravitational anomalies that suggest—" "Well, sir, it looks like entire star systems are being consumed." The transmission cut to static. Outwatch 7 never responded to further attempts at communication. Brought this news to the council the next day. The response was predictable. "Perhaps the crew simply abandoned their post," suggested the collective. "Humans are known for being emotional under stress." 600 people don't just abandon their post," said through gritted teeth. "Your species has abandoned military positions before," the delegate reminded her. "During your own primitive wars." Left the council chambers that day knowing she was fighting a losing battle. The older species would not act until the threat was obvious to them. By then, it might be too late. Reports continued flooding in from human colonies near the rim. New Osaka went silent on Thursday. Port stopped responding to communications on Saturday. When rescue ships arrived, they found something that makes blood run cold. The colonies were not destroyed. They were abandoned. Houses stood empty with meals half-eaten on tables. Schools had children's drawings still pinned to walls. Spaceports had ships sitting ready for departure, their engines still warm. But there were no people. Security cameras showed the same pattern on every world. Citizens of all species simply stopped what they were doing, looked up at the sky with blank expressions, and walked away from their homes. They wandered into the wilderness and disappeared. The rescue teams found no bodies, no signs of violence, no indication of where several million beings had gone. "It's like they just lost the will to exist," reported Lieutenant Commander Park from the rescue ship Vigilance. "Sir, we found personal logs from some of the colonists. In their final entries, they all said the same thing. They said existing felt pointless, like reality itself was meaningless." Presented this evidence to the council with growing desperation. "Something is affecting the minds of entire populations," she explained. "It's not killing them, it's making them not want to live." "Mass hysteria," diagnosed the ethereal conclave's medical expert. "Humans are susceptible to collective psychological episodes." "It's affecting all species," protested. "Humans, even some crystals went dark on New Osaka." "Perhaps exposure to human paranoia is contagious," suggested speaker with what might have been amusement. Realized then that she was talking to people who had forgotten that impossible things could happen. The older species had categorized and explained every phenomenon in their part of the galaxy. To them, anything outside their understanding simply could not exist. That night sent an encrypted message to Earth. "Council refuses to act. Recommend protocol." Admiral's reply came 6 hours later. "Approved. We're on our own." Protocol was humanity's contingency for fighting threats without Council support. Human fleets would be repositioned to create a defensive line. Human colonies would be quietly evacuated from threatened areas. Human scientists would work around the clock to understand and counter whatever was approaching. Most importantly, humanity would continue to protect the Council species, whether they wanted protection or not. Looked out her office window at the crystal spires of the Council complex. Somewhere out there, reality itself was being consumed by something that made existence feel meaningless. The greatest civilizations in the galaxy refused to believe such a thing was possible, but had read the reports. She had seen the empty colonies and the vanished monitoring stations. She knew that humanity stood alone against something that could end not just life, but the very desire to live. The irony was not lost on her. The species the Council considered most primitive and emotional might be the only ones psychologically equipped to fight an enemy that attacked the will to exist. Human stubbornness and irrational hope might be the galaxy's only defense against cosmic despair. Just prayed it would be enough. Stood before the full assembly of the Galactic Council for what she knew would be the last time. The great crystal hall buzzed with irritated whispers. She had called for an emergency session using Protocol 7, a procedure reserved for threats to galactic civilization. Most delegates seemed annoyed at being pulled away from their regular business. "Honored Speaker," began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I stand before you today to reveal a truth that my species has kept hidden for 70 years. Speaker's ethereal form flickered with impatience. "Ambassador, if this is another report about your phantom readings from empty space, this assembly has more pressing matters to address." "This is about why those readings exist," said. She activated her personal display, showing images that made several delegates lean forward in surprise. "These are records of threats that humanity has faced and defeated without Council knowledge or assistance." The first image showed twisted metal that seemed to hurt the eyes to look at. The Convergence, 47 years ago, an artificial intelligence from a collapsed pocket dimension, attempted to rewrite the physical laws of our galaxy. Humanity fought a 3-year war in folded space to destroy it. Murmurs arose from the assembly. The delegate's crystal form pulsed skeptical yellow. "We have no records of such an event." "Because we contained it before it could affect Council space," replied. Next image. The display showed a star system where the planets orbited in impossible geometric patterns. The Theta reality storm, 22 years ago. A cascade failure in dimensional barriers threatened to merge our universe with one where mathematics worked differently. Human science teams spent 2 years building stabilization fields to repair the damage. "Preposterous," declared the delegate. "Such threats would have been detected by our monitoring systems." Smiled grimly. "Your monitoring systems were designed and maintained by humans. We made sure they didn't detect what we didn't want you to see." The hall erupted in confused chatter, waited for quiet, then continued. "For 70 years, humanity has served as this galaxy's immune system. We volunteered for the dangerous assignments. We patrolled the empty sectors. We investigated the anomalies that your scientists dismissed as impossible. And when we found real threats, we dealt with them quietly." "This is fantasy," the ethereal conclave's representative said. "Humans are barely capable of basic space travel. How could you possibly fight cosmic threats?" His expression hardened. "Because we're the only species crazy enough to try. Your civilizations are built on logic and order. When faced with something that shouldn't exist, you explain it away. We see something impossible trying to kill us, and our first instinct is to kill it back." She brought up new images. Human ships with strange, angular designs that seemed to twist space around them. "We've developed technologies you wouldn't recognize because they're built to fight enemies you refuse to acknowledge exist. Reality anchors to stabilize dimensional barriers. Psychic dampeners to prevent mental contamination. Quantum scramblers to hide our movements from entities that exist outside normal time." The delegate clicked his claws nervously. Why keep this secret? Why not ask for help? We tried, said bitterly. Every time we brought evidence of these threats to the council, you dismissed them as human paranoia or equipment malfunctions. So we stopped asking for permission and started asking for forgiveness. Except we never needed forgiveness because none of you noticed what we were doing. Speaker's form blazed with indignation. You admit to conducting unauthorized military operations throughout council space. I admit to saving your lives repeatedly while you debated trade agreements, shot back. Do you want to know why humanity gets all the undesirable assignments? Because someone has to watch the places where impossible things happen. Someone has to be ready to fight when logic and reason aren't enough. The display changed again, showing current readings from the rim sectors. The quantum distortions had grown larger, consuming entire star systems now. This is what we've been trying to warn you about. It's not just another threat we can handle alone. This entity exists outside our understanding of physics. It doesn't destroy civilizations. It makes them not want to exist. And it's too big for humanity to stop by ourselves. Looked around the hall at faces that ranged from confused to angry to outright disbelieving. 47 human colonies have gone silent in the past month, not destroyed, abandoned. The populations just walked away from their lives and vanished into empty space. We're seeing the same effect spreading to mixed colonies with council species. Mass delusion, diagnosed the medical delegate. Humans are prone to collective psychological breaks. Felt something snap inside her. Martinez's colony had 12,000 residents. Outpost housed 300 crystals. They're all gone. All of them just stopped caring about existing and walked into the void. Perhaps exposure to human mental instability is more contagious than previously believed, suggested the collective with their usual condescending tone. Stared at them for a long moment. Around the hall, the greatest minds in galactic civilization nodded in agreement. Of course it was the humans' fault. Of course their primitive emotions were contaminating other species. The idea that an external threat could affect their perfect society was simply unthinkable. Let me be very clear, said, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. In the past 70 years, humanity has prevented 6 reality storms, 12 dimensional incursions, 4 AI rebellions, and 37 psychic plagues from reaching council space. We've lost over 2 million people fighting threats you insist don't exist. And we're supposed to believe this fantastic claim based on what evidence? Speaker demanded. Gestured at the display showing the spreading quantum distortions. Based on the evidence that's about to eat your entire civilization. More human hysteria, the ethereal conclave's representative said dismissively. Your species' tendency toward paranoid delusion is well documented. We recommend immediate psychological evaluation for all human personnel in council space. Looked around the hall one final time. These beings had created wonders beyond human imagination. They had built a perfect society, ended war, achieved harmony between species that evolved on opposite ends of the galaxy. But they had also grown soft and blind, unable to conceive of threats their philosophy couldn't explain. Ambassador, said formally, does the Council reject Earth's warning about the approaching entity? We reject your unfounded claims about phantom threats and secret wars, replied. The Council suggests that humanity's representation would benefit from psychiatric intervention. Nodded slowly. And does the Council refuse Earth's offer of assistance in defensive preparations? We see no need for defense against imaginary enemies. Picked up her personal and typed a short message. Protocol Exodus authorized. Begin immediate implementation. She looked up at the assembled delegates one last time. We've been holding the line for 70 years. We tried to warn you. We tried to protect you. But we can't save people who won't let themselves be saved. Turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, Speaker called out, "Where are you going, Ambassador?" Paused at the doorway without turning around, to save the people who deserve saving. As she left the hall, could hear the delegates already returning to their regular business. Trade negotiations resumed. Cultural exchange programs were discussed. Art festivals were planned. None of them noticed that every human in the hall had quietly left during speech. None of them realized that human technicians were no longer maintaining their communication networks, their early warning systems, their defensive installations. The galaxy's immune system had just declared the patient terminal and withdrawn to save itself. Only wished she could feel sorry for them. Commander Lee of the Commonwealth made his routine inspection of Defense Platform 7 at 800 Standard Time. He expected to find the human crew at their posts, maintaining the quantum sensors and reality stabilizers as they had for the past 15 years. Instead, he found empty corridors. The platform systems were still running perfectly. Coffee sat cooling in the break room. Personal belongings remained in their lockers, but every single human was gone. "Security to Command Center," Lee called into his communicator. "I need an immediate of human personnel on this platform." The response came back within minutes. "Sir, we show 0 human on the platform. No record of anyone leaving." Lee felt his scales prickle with unease. 47 humans had been working this shift. You don't lose 47 people without someone noticing. Similar reports flooded in from across Council space over the next few hours. Human crews had vanished from monitoring stations, defense platforms, and maintenance facilities. Ships drifted empty in space, their human crews simply gone. At the Trade Federation's central hub, Director stared at his screens in growing panic. The trade networks that connected 800 worlds were starting to fail. Cargo ships sat stranded at hyperspace nodes that were no longer responding to automated systems. "What do you mean the relay stations aren't working?" he demanded of his chief technician. "Sir, the stations are functioning, but their maintenance protocols have shut down. It appears the human technicians uploaded some kind of virus before they disappeared." His translator crackled with static. "A virus? Scan for hostile code." "That's just it, sir. It's not hostile code. It's the absence of code. The humans apparently removed all the custom programming they'd installed over the decades. The systems are running on basic factory settings." For the first time, realized how much of the galaxy's infrastructure had quietly become dependent on human modifications and maintenance. Systems that had worked flawlessly for decades suddenly revealed themselves as held together by human ingenuity. On the Crystal engineer Ra watched in confusion as the planetary communication grid began experiencing cascading failures. The network had been built using crystal technology, but apparently maintained by human technicians who understood both crystal matrix theory and quantum routing protocols. "The humans documented none of their procedures," reported her subordinate. "We can see what they changed in our systems, but not why they changed it." Ra's crystal form pulsed frustrated red. How did we become dependent on such a primitive species for our own technology? The answer, she was beginning to realize, was that humans weren't primitive at all. They were simply different. While other species built elegant, logical systems, humans built systems that worked in real-world conditions. They planned for failures that shouldn't happen but did. They designed redundancies for problems that seemed impossible but weren't. At the council headquarters, Speaker watched the reports with growing alarm. In less than 48 hours, the entire galactic communication network was beginning to collapse. Trade routes were disrupted. Defense systems were operating at reduced capacity. Early warning networks that had functioned perfectly for centuries were going dark one by one. "How extensive is human involvement in our infrastructure?" he asked his chief analyst. The response made his ethereal form flicker with shock. 70% of our monitoring stations are operated by human crews. 85% of our defensive installations have human-modified systems. 96% of our early warning networks rely on human-maintained equipment. That's impossible, protested. Humans are junior members of the Council. They couldn't possibly be so integrated into our systems. Sir, the records show that humans consistently volunteered for maintenance assignments that other species found tedious or dangerous. Over time, they became the default choice for any job involving remote monitoring or hazardous duty. Realized with growing horror that humanity had made itself indispensable by doing the work nobody else wanted to do. Meanwhile, on the galaxy's rim, the entity's influence spread faster than ever before. Without human reality anchors and psychic dampeners, its corruption of spacetime accelerated dramatically. The colony on's edge was the first Council world to fall completely. Monitoring stations that should have detected the approaching psychic wave were offline. Their human crews mysteriously vanished. The colony received no warning before the entity's influence washed over them. Governor Oss was reviewing agricultural reports when the feeling hit him. Suddenly, nothing seemed important. The numbers on his screen looked meaningless. Why was he concerned about crop yields? Why did any of this matter? He set down his and walked to his office window. Outside, he could see other citizens emerging from their homes with the same blank expression. They looked up at the sky where strange lights danced between the stars, then began walking toward the wilderness. Oz felt no fear, no sadness, no anything. Existence simply felt pointless. He opened his office door and joined the exodus, leaving behind a thriving colony that would be found empty 3 days later. The pattern repeated across the galaxy as the entity's corruption spread unopposed. Worlds went silent not with screams but with sighs. Entire populations simply stopped caring about their lives and wandered away into empty space. The trade director found himself staring at profit reports that no longer seemed meaningful. His life's work building prosperity for trillions of beings felt like an elaborate joke. Why had he bothered? What was the point of any achievement when existence itself was arbitrary? He stood up from his desk and walked out of his office, leaving behind financial systems that would crash within days without his oversight. The proved slightly more resistant, their crystalline nature offering some protection against psychic influence. But even they were not immune. Crystal engineer Ra watched her colleagues dim one by one as the entity's despair took hold. Their logical minds simply calculated that existence was statistically meaningless and chose to end their participation in it. In the council chambers, Speaker made increasingly desperate attempts to contact humanity. Every frequency was tried. Every diplomatic channel was opened. Ancient communication protocols were dusted off and activated. They received only automated responses. This communication terminal is no longer monitored by human personnel. Please contact your local council representative for assistance. It was maddening. The humans had vanished so completely it was as if they had never existed. But the holes they left behind proved just how vital they had been. Sir, reported Said, we're detecting massive ship movements beyond the galactic rim. Long-range sensors show what appears to be a fleet of human vessels, but they're using some kind of phase technology we don't recognize. Felt a chill of realization. The humans hadn't simply vanished. They had left, and they had taken technology that the Council didn't even know existed. Open all channels, he ordered. Broadcast on every frequency. Tell them we need to talk. The response came 6 hours later, transmitted on an obscure emergency band that only the military still monitored. It was voice, coming from somewhere impossibly far away. The Terran Assembly established Protocol Exodus 73 years ago. When a patient refuses treatment and attacks the doctor, The doctor must withdraw to save themselves and others who can still be helped. We're sorry. We tried. The message cut to static, leaving the council alone with their failing civilization and the entity that was consuming their will to exist. For the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy's most advanced species faced extinction, and the primitive, paranoid humans they had dismissed as irrelevant were the only ones who might have been able to save them. But the humans were gone, taking their stubborn hope and irrational defiance with them. All that remained was the spreading shadow of cosmic despair and the bitter knowledge that pride had doomed them all. 6 months after the human exodus, the Galactic Council existed more in name than reality. Of the original 847 member species, only 212 still maintained any form of government. The rest had simply stopped. Commander Lee, now the highest-ranking military officer left in the Commonwealth, stood in the empty council chambers. The great crystal hall that had once housed the galaxy's greatest minds now echoed with only his footsteps. Most of the delegates' seats sat empty. Those few representatives still present stared blankly at displays showing the continuing collapse of their civilizations. The entity had consumed 60% of council space without ever showing itself directly. Worlds went silent not with explosions but with silence. Ships drifted empty through space, their crews having simply abandoned them mid-journey. Entire star systems became graveyards where life continued, but no one cared enough to live it. Status report, Lee requested from the few remaining council staff. The crystal serving as communications coordinator pulsed a weak, fatting blue. 47 member species have ceased all communication. 28 have officially dissolved their governments. 13 have walked into space. Lee's scales rippled with suppressed grief. The Trade Federation had been the latest to fall. Their entire leadership council had been found standing on the observation deck of their orbital station, staring out at the stars with expressions of profound emptiness. They had opened the airlocks and simply stepped into vacuum, not out of despair, but out of complete indifference to their own existence. "Any word from the search teams looking for the humans?" he asked. "Nothing, sir. It's as if they never existed, but—" The crystal paused, its light flickering uncertainly. "But what?" "We've detected gravitational anomalies consistent with massive fleet movements in the clouds. The energy signatures match theoretical human phase technology." Lee felt a spark of hope. The humans were out there somewhere. If they could be contacted, reasoned with, perhaps convinced to return and help fight the entity that was destroying everything. "Broadcast another message," he ordered. "All frequencies maximum power." The message was simple. "This is Commander Lee of the Commonwealth, acting speaker for the Galactic Council. Humanity, if you can hear this, we need your help. We were wrong. Please respond." For days there was only silence. Then, on the 7th day, a response came. Not to the official council channels, but to an ancient emergency frequency that most species had forgotten existed. The signal was weak, coming from impossibly far away, but the voice was unmistakably. "Commander Lee, this is Ambassador of the Terran Evacuation Fleet. I'm sorry it took so long to respond, but we had to debate whether it was safe to make contact." Lee's communication set up immediately, patching the signal through to every surviving council member. Around the galaxy, the few remaining leaders listened with desperate attention. Lee said, relief evident in his voice, "Thank the ancestors you're alive. We need you to come back. We need humanity's help." There was a long pause before responded. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of sadness that made Lee's heart ache. "Commander, I wish we could help, but the entity you're facing cannot be fought by us anymore. It's grown too powerful, fed too much on the despair of your civilizations." "Then help us evacuate," Lee pleaded. "Help us find safe haven like you did." "We're trying," said, "but you have to understand something about what's happening to your people. This entity doesn't just kill, it makes existence feel meaningless. It attacks the fundamental will to live. On the crystal platforms of the engineer, Ra listened to the transmission with growing understanding. Her people's logical minds had made them think they could analyze their way out of the crisis. Instead, their logic had made them conclude that existence was statistically improbable and therefore pointless. Continued, most species in the galaxy evolved to be logical, peaceful, rational. When faced with something that makes existence feel arbitrary, they accept that conclusion and stop caring about living. But humans were different. Different how? Asked the collective representative, one of the few of their kind still coherent enough to communicate. We're stubborn, said simply. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. When faced with impossible odds, our first instinct isn't to give up, it's to get angry and try harder. When something tells us life is meaningless, we create meaning out of spite. Lee thought about the human soldiers he had known. They were indeed stubborn to the point of irrationality. They would charge into hopeless battles, not because they calculated victory was possible, but because they refused to accept defeat. The entity feeds on despair and apathy, explained. It makes people conclude that existence is pointless, but humans respond to that conclusion by saying, "So what?" and continuing to exist anyway. Our emotions, our irrationality, our refusal to accept cosmic meaninglessness, those aren't primitive traits. They're psychological armor against existential horror. For the first time, Lee understood why humans had always seemed so chaotic compared to other species. Their emotional volatility wasn't a weakness. It was a survival adaptation against threats that attacked the mind rather than the body. He said desperately, "Can you teach us? Can you help our people develop this resistance?" Another long pause. "Commander, we've spent 6 months trying exactly that with the refugees we've managed to evacuate. Some species can learn to think like humans. They actually show promise. Your warrior culture has some built-in resistance to existential despair. But most council species, their entire philosophy is based on logic and order. When that foundation crumbles, they have nothing left to hold on to." The transmission crackled with interference, then cleared. His voice came through more strongly, as if she had moved closer to her transmitter. "I need you to understand what we did," she said. "Protocol Exodus wasn't abandonment. It was triage on a galactic scale. We identified populations that could be saved and evacuated them. We took anyone who would listen, regardless of species. But we couldn't waste time trying to convince people who refused to believe they needed saving." The crystal serving as the representative pulsed a weak question. "How many did you save?" "About 40 million beings from various species," replied. "Not nearly enough. We tried to save more, but—" Her voice broke slightly. "Most of your people chose to stay. They believed their governments could handle the crisis through diplomatic channels." Lee felt the full weight of the tragedy. Hundreds of billions of beings across the galaxy, all dead or dying because they couldn't accept that their perfect society was vulnerable to something outside their understanding. "Where are you now?" he asked. "The Andromeda Galaxy," said. "It will take us several thousand years to reach it even with our phase drives, but it's far enough away to be safe. We're building a new civilization there, one that's prepared for impossible threats." The communication began to fade as distance and interference took their toll. Lee called out, "Will you remember us?" Her final words came through clearly despite the static. "We'll remember all of you. This dedication to prosperity, this love of beauty and mathematics, this honor and courage, the collective's wisdom, will carry the best parts of your civilizations with us to the stars." The transmission ended, leaving the survivors alone with their grief and the growing shadow of the entity that continued to consume their will to exist. Lee looked around the empty council chambers one last time. He thought about words, how humans created meaning out of spite when faced with cosmic meaninglessness. Perhaps that was something he could learn. He activated his personal communicator and sent a message to every surviving military unit in the galaxy. This is Commander Lee. The humans may be gone, but we're still here. We may not be able to save our civilizations, but we can choose how they end. We can choose to face extinction with dignity instead of despair. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough to save them, but it was something humans would have done, choosing defiance in the face of inevitable defeat. Far away in the void between galaxies, stood on the bridge of the refugee ship New Earth, watching the Milky Way grow smaller in the distance. Around her, survivors of dozens of species worked together to build something new. They carried with them the knowledge, art, and culture of 800 civilizations. They also carried the hard-earned wisdom that paradise must always be defended by those willing to stand guard in dark places. Wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her home galaxy slowly die. They had saved everyone they could, but she would carry the weight of all those they couldn't save for the rest of her life. Humanity had once again proven its unique role in the cosmos, not as conquerors or even as teachers, but as stubborn guardians who refused to let the darkness win completely. Even in retreat, they had chosen hope over despair, meaning over emptiness. It would have to be enough.